What would happen if the entire world realized their true nature? Would conflict still exist? Or would the ultimate ideal of peace on earth become an eventual reality? Realizing one's true self or true nature, or to use Sanskrit, Atman, is usually only isolated to those sages and gurus and spiritual masters that we read about in the great texts. But what would happen if more of the world began to be focused on Eastern spirituality and the core principle of ultimate liberation? So the liberation from your identity, from your ego, to realize the true self, the Atman, the ultimate substratum of existence that connects us all as one. What would happen if the entire world began to realize this and abide in the self? Now, it does sound idealistic, and it's probably not possible, but what would really happen? Now, to explore this, we have to understand really what our true nature is. As I said, the ultimate substratum, what we would call in Sanskrit Atman, which is identical with Brahman, which is the ultimate reality, which is identical with Tao, the ultimate reality. And that's our basis. That's the heart of our being, is the Tao, is Brahman. And it's only the ego that gets in our way and distorts our reality from seeing that pure oneness. So what would truly happen if we did abide in that place? Because when we look at that, everything is the self from that perspective. Everything is Brahman. Everything is Tao. It's all one. Do you see? It's all one. So what would that do to our distorted perceptions of the world? What would it do to the duality that we think we live in, according to our ego? So if we realize this ultimate truth, all of our physical and psychological differences would disappear. Now, it doesn't mean they don't exist on a phenomenal level, on a very superficial level. But ultimately, those types of physical and psychological differences don't exist from the ultimate state. It's just a wave. It's a covering. It's a layer. But ultimately, it's all one from the non-dualist perspective. So they would all disappear. So when you think about that, all physical and psychological differences are gone. There's no conflict. Everyone gets along with their life in their way, minding their own business and appreciating everyone because everyone knows that all is the self, all is Atman. So there's no need to argue. Argument would not even arise because majority of people would be silent in their mind and wouldn't have a personal agenda because personal agenda arises from an identity. Once the identity is removed or downregulated, then we begin to see the oneness of reality and we begin to see everyone as the one ultimate Brahman or Tao. And so no conflict or disagreement would arise. Sure, perceptually, as I said, on a phenomenal level, you could see that things are different. You could see that a tree is a tree and a rock is a rock. But when you begin to peel the layers back and you begin to abide in the self, what happens is you begin to gain a sense of unity, of an ultimate reality, of oneness, that a lot of people actually don't ever experience unless they are in direct contact with the master and they begin to live with them or stay close to them for a long period of time. Some of us will feel this when we go into nature, but we have to stay in nature for a long period of time to experience this kind of dissolution of your ego, because your ego doesn't really have any function in nature. It has no real purpose. So if you don't come from your ultimate state in nature, then you cannot act immediately and appropriately to each and every situation because you begin to analyze things, overanalyze things in most cases, which can lead to all sorts of trouble, particularly in nature. So all differences would disappear, and all that is left is the self with a capital S, the undifferentiated consciousness of Atman, because that's all we are truly deep down, is this undifferentiated state of consciousness. We identify with the localization of this one consciousness, the body and the mind, but that distorts our perception of reality. Once you begin to downregulate that, you begin to see that oneness. And so this would be the ultimate ideal of peace and harmony on earth. Now, is that possible? Many of us will say no. And there are many differing opinions here, right? We have the Bodhisattva ideal in Buddhism, where in Mahayana Buddhism, they believe that everyone will ultimately be enlightened, and the bodhisattva comes back life after life until that work is done. But the Theravada Buddhists disagree with that. And there are many other different schools that disagree with that as well, because when you look at it from a non-dual perspective, or even if you look at it from a Taoist or Zen perspective, along with Advaita, Vedanta, everything is perfect as it is from the self. It's only the ego that sees imperfection. The self, the Atman, sees everything as perfect, even in its grossest form. And that would be hard for someone to understand who live from their ego. But once you've gone deep within yourself, then you do see reality as it truly is. And you see that reality is in its perfected state. But in saying that, getting back to what I was saying, if we all did come from the self, then even things on a psychological and physical level would begin to dissolve themselves and disappear, because there would just be a common unity amongst people. There would be, for the first time in history, an actual real harmony, because when you are coming from the self, one of your natural tendencies is ahimsa, is non-harming. So you would not harm anyone physically or psychologically, because that can only arise from the ego, from self-interest, from a personal agenda. But as I said, most people wouldn't agree with this, that everyone can realize the self, all collectively as once. Obviously, if we look out into the world, it seems pretty much like an impossibility. And if we look at the teachings of George Ivanovich Gurdjieff, Gurdjieff would say that certain people are here to fulfill a certain role in some sense, like almost like an organic process, while others are here to actually fulfill the purpose of being human, which is ultimate liberation. But he said not everybody can fulfill that ultimate liberation, because our biological needs would be neglected, because we'd all be probably meditating within caves or something of that nature. But it is an interesting perspective to look at. It really is an interesting perspective to look at. Now, I'll throw it down to you guys. What do you think? Is it possible for everyone to realize the Atman? Or is it just an idealistic notion that some schools of thought actually believe in, such as Mahayana Buddhism? Shanti, shanti, shanti.